What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Nitty Gritty Dispatches from the Front.
From the front, I appreciate you having me back here.
In this specific series, we talk about not just all of the data, but what are like the strategies, what are the core principles and values and reasons that we do things or guide people to do things to be successful, whether it's selling your home or buying a home. And Max, you've been working with a lot of buyers and writing offers. What have you noticed from your perspective is really your secret sauce? What kind of questions are you asking people to know what's most important to a seller?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. It's we've been writing a lot of offers lately, so getting a lot of practice with this topic. A lot of the questions I'm asking and when we're discussing offers come down to things that are beyond price. And how do we learn about those things? Well, as your agent, I'm communicating with you, representing the seller as a listing agent, and figuring out what is important to those folks. Where are they going? What's their story? Are they relocating for a quick job and they need a quick close and need to be out of there? Is this an investment property? It's sitting vacant. They're just looking for the best offer and there's no real rush there. Just figuring out what their situation is allows us to be creative with terms around that offer outside of just price alone.
Yeah, and it's not always just about price. And I think many times people don't communicate. I think that's like the step one is, as a listing agent or even as a buyer's agent, sometimes people just submit offers and don't actually ask questions. And it's, even if it is the best offer, you have no idea any backstory.
Right.
Like, who are your buyers? What are their motives? Like, are we going to be working well together? Right. There's so many elements that go into it just beyond price. I mean, price is important, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Price is huge. And there's a lot of important factors around there as well. So I guess from your perspective as a listing agent, maybe what do you look for? What do those conversations look like with buyer's agents?
Yeah, I mean, I hold myself to a high standard with how I communicate with others and deliver a level of professionalism to another agent and their clients as well. And part of that is basing offers on facts, like it's not just throwing as much money as possible, because that to me is like, well, are they basing this on a core of data and information and facts and what the market's actually doing, or are they just Trojan horsing this offer and like trying to cover up another term in there that is not so great?
Sure.
So there's that element. And I just love when people give me a call, take some time to like not just talk business, say, how are you doing? Good to meet you. Or just like build a little rapport, right? Because if we are going to work together, that's step one. I want to know that we're going to work well together. And that's not necessarily my choice, even if the seller chooses that person's offer, but that does play into what I'm going to guide the seller to do, right? And next piece is asking those questions. What's most important? And just stay besides price, because we know like they want the most money, right? They want to sell the house for the most money. Shocking, I know. And so asking that question, besides price, what's most important? And it could be leasebacks. We've been seeing that happen a lot, right?
Yeah, leasebacks are happening more and more. And you mean as the buyer's agent, allowing the seller to stay in the home?
Just flexibility around timelines, whether it's closing or possession or whatever it may be. And I mean, everything in between those two things, between the price and then when things happen, it's all like the less you include, the more risk it is to the buyer, but the less risk it is to the seller. So what we've been seeing in a competitive market is like those two terms being kind of the most important piece. But things like earnest money or inspection or financing or appraisal waiver, like all these things just are like layers that get added on. People say, well, if I do this one thing, is this going to be the thing that makes or breaks it? And you're like, it's just a layer.
Right. Yeah, that is one layer. And I think that is a good point. You know, what the goal is from the seller's perspective is they want the most rock solid offer that has the least risk of falling apart. And from the buyer's perspective, you're trying to give them the best offer that meets those terms. And that does mean sometimes a little bit more risk as the buyer, but that seems to be what's happening out there.
It seems to be what's happening out there. But I would say one caveat is when there's lack of effort or guidance from the buyer's broker, typically you'll see that person have to just waive more and more. But sometimes you can, like, I think it's really important as a buyer's agent, and you do this really well, is finding that threshold of like, you don't just want to waive everything right off the bat. You want to protect your buyer if you can, the best possible. But ultimately, like, what's that threshold in between 0 and 100 where they're protected somewhat on something,
Right.
versus just all stops are off. You see these offers come in that are just like nothing, like all stops are off.
Yeah, that's a little scary sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about financing? That's a really important piece.
Glad you brought that up.
When you have, I would say the majority of people do not pay cash for homes. There is more and more, as we're seeing a lot more equity that people have in previous homes or, in other investments,
Right.
being able to pay cash.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, people are paying, getting a loan. So what are you seeing as far as waiving financing? Do you recommend that?
Do I recommend that? No, I
Yeah.
don't. Because at the end of the day, 2 days before closing, if for whatever reason you're not able to get this loan that you've been told you could get up until this point, I don't think that you should waive your right and be forced to either lose your earnest money or close on this house some other way. So retaining that financing contingency, I think, super important. I think there's other ways to be competitive before crossing that one out.
Yeah. So just don't jump to that. I think at the end of the day, there are ways to give the seller more security without losing all of your security. Because like you said, if it falls through, you lose your earnest money, there's no stops in place. So, it's important when you're on one side of the coin, would you agree, to look at it from the other person's perspective?
Absolutely. And if at all possible, find the solution that is going to, it's just the perfect blend of everything for the seller and the buyer. It sounds silly and too hopeful, but trying to meet in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. And the middle might, in today's world, be very lopsided on the seller's side, but at least some sort of middle. And hopefully this is helpful. We're trying to get some insight in what's actually happening in today's world. If you're an agent, communicate with each other.
And as a buyer, ask your agent, how can we be most competitive on this property if we can't be on the top with price? How else can we compete?
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today on Dispatches from the Front. Y'all are awesome. And also, if you have topics that you'd like to hear us talk about, please go ahead and submit some comments, send us a message, call me, text me, whatever. Sounds good. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.